Keane. I'm an independent advisor in this industry, and I'm here with Ian Trow of ATEM. Ian, you've just been talking about some of the new video codec technologies coming through to the industry. What is driving the development of a new codec at this point, and specifically AV1 that you mentioned?
I think the main issue is HEVC's had a difficult time from a royalties perspective. I think it's also challenged by its predecessor, AVC. But I think the royalties issue is the one that's causing most concern. And the reason for that is that, with the predictions of internet-based video being anywhere between 70 to 80% within the next 3 years, the uncertainty associated with HEVC royalties, plus also the need for a standard that's better tuned for OTT and higher formats like 4K with HDR, is forcing people to consider taking an alternate take on video compression. And that's really what caused the alliance of Open Media to actually consider putting AV1 together, so the needs for streaming operators are better answered, and they feel that they have a standard that has similar performance characteristics to HEVC, but tuned for OTT and internet applications.
The Alliance for Open Media that you mentioned has really been built by, one could say, the internet giants. How well will that be accepted by traditional broadcasters, seeing as that really is coming from the heart of the challenge to them going forward?
I think that's a very good question. And I think it's a careful bet by the Alliance of Open Media. In the presentation that I just gave, I said that expectations were moving from live linear to OTT and catch-up. 5 years ago, if you tried to do a standard that was ostensibly based purely for streaming applications, the case might have been marginal. But now if you look at the demographic, you look at the takeoff of streaming, it's been a very carefully constructed bet to say we need a standard that represents this. So I think AV1 is a case of right time, right place. And it's certainly in terms of people's viewing characteristics, I think the acceptance is certainly there and the momentum's behind it, particularly with the new streaming challenges like Netflix, Facebook, Google, Amazon, really challenging traditional broadcasters, that it's got an enormous impetus behind it.
Realistically, the commercial rollout of any new video codec depends upon a whole raft of ecosystem implementations, right? Not least, the codec has to be implemented in silicon, has to therefore get from silicon into consumer devices that people are going to use to actually watch that video. That's the nub of the matter. So realistically, how long before AV1 gets into consumer hands in, let's say, an iPhone?
I think that the traditional implementation of an encoder and a decoder in silicon, where we've moved on from that. Certainly expectations from a head end is for a software application, but I entirely concede that for any of the higher end formats and also high value assets where you're putting a lot of effort into encoding them, hardware acceleration is involved, both in terms of the encoder and the decoder side. So the comments that you were making is that from the encoder side, you've actually got to make it viable, and viability runs from anything from a reasonable runtime on the encoder side and a reasonable compute efficiency, particularly on the phone side, runs to battery life, processing, and also being endorsed on a wide number of handsets. So whilst you are seeing people who are producing test streams now here as 2018 with the standard looking to be finalised, I think it'll more realistically be presenting itself as a commercial challenge in 2019, probably 2020. And I think that the rollout will predominantly be high-based, high-profile offline assets, where a pre-encoded version of that to really reduce CDN traffic is worth a lot of money and will be a flagship for the standard. And I think at a much later time, when people better understand the standard in terms of runtime, tool set, and so forth, you'll see it optimized for the ultimate, which is low latency sports type coverage.
Is it really being driven primarily by going to the next standard of resolution, i.e. 4K, UHD, with all the bells and whistles around HDR, improved color, all of that stuff? Is that what is driving this, or will it be applied to HD content to get greater efficiency, wider distribution, lower cost, etc.?
I think undoubtedly the HD aspect of it. You're seeing broadcasters struggling with 4K, HDR, wide color gamut, that they are only introducing trials and extending it to customers as part of player packages. I mean, the BBC's announcement about the World Cup is a classic example there. I think that this is first and foremost an OTT streaming standard targeting the sweet spot being HD. That's where customers are, that's the resolution, that's the kind of bandwidth that they're looking at. In terms of the extensions to it, yes, it increases its appeal, having the HDR and wide color gamut, but from my impressions, the handling of it is a secondary endorsement to it, where the primary is to improve on where the real battleground is between OTT and catch-up and traditional DTH, which is HD.
Okay, Ian, here's my crystal ball for you to gaze into.
Yeah.
10 years out.
Yeah.
Split of the market percentage-wise by codec. What percent will be AV1? What percent will be HEVC? What percent will be H.264 or AVC? What percent will be something else?
I think that's a very good question, and I'll answer it directly. I think that it is, given the impetus behind AV1 and the players that there are and the kind of content that they're doing, I'd imagine in 10 years' time it'll be about 50% behind AV1. I think the split between AVC and H.264, who knows? That's about where the players, the set-top boxes, where they are, and it's also about where the demographic shift is actually happening. But I do see that there will be a lot of effort going into offline titles to actually feed libraries, and an awful lot of effort going in there that'll mitigate some of the more frightening aspects of runtime and processor requirements for AV1. So it will get its soft launch. But I do think that at the end of the day, people are looking for commonality of approach, and the royalty-free aspect of it will be a considerable push for trying to achieve the ultimate in terms of live sports events. I think I'm being realistic, because most of my colleagues, whenever they talk about things, they sort of say, in 3-4 years' time, we're expecting this standard to dominate. And I don't actually think that it's going to be like that, because I think there'll be legacy reasons and there'll be platform reasons why people have to stay with AVC or even HEVC deployments. But undoubtedly, the flexibility of actually a downloadable player will mean that there is not quite the same legacy constraints on deployment. And I do think that with the increasing power of platforms, that does go into AV1's favour. But we've got to respect legacy in this respect.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Ian.
Thank you.